Please welcome Joseph Lubin, co-founder of Ethereum and founder of Consensus.
Hello. There he is. First, I'd like to thank Amanda, Jesse, Saraswati for putting on this awesome event and the many other Consensus participants and volunteers. I also want to thank you all for being here and making this epic. I noticed earlier today, before I get into the talk, I noticed earlier today that a legendary figure was in the audience. David Chom is sitting right there. So David's a pioneer cryptographer. He put together a protocol called eCash in, I think, '83. And worked on it for a number of years, ended up commercializing it as DigiCash. I think Deutsche Bank and maybe Credit Suisse, so they're on their way to implementing it. And centralization got in the way, pretty much. It was the first one of the early cryptocurrencies. Wasn't a decentralized cryptocurrency, and therefore, I think certain frictions made it difficult to commercialize it. So thank you so much for being here. It's really great to have you here. So fortunately, Satoshi, whoever they are, figured out how to put together a similar sort of construct and start this. Been calling it a revolution for a long time, but I like calling it an evolution now because we need to take this technology, we need to take these breakthroughs, and we need to integrate it with all the other elements of society, so it's a little less confrontational. So today, we're going to talk about the nature of the firm, what this technology has to say about how we organize ourselves for collective action. So November 9, 2015, at DevCon 1, the second really, first public Ethereum developer conference, I spoke about various different things that we were doing at Consensus, and I concluded by describing what I called something, playfully, the nothing at stake problem. And it's the nothing at stake problem for society in that there are so many people on our planet who are working for the benefit of others who don't feel like they have stake. They're not really grounded in essentially the pursuit of working for themselves and having their own economic agency. And so conclusion was, if everybody owns a piece of everything, then we will all be in better shape. The nature of trade amongst different nations, it's valuable if you produce excess goods, if you need certain goods. That's why we do trade between different nations. But importantly, trade enables us to build interdependencies, reliances on one another. And so if you're trading olive oil for fuel oil, you're less likely to get into very difficult conflicts with one another. So taking that into the context of interpersonal, international, intercorporation, we'll see how that unfolds. So essentially, I suggested that we imagine a world of equity tokenized organizations where everyone owns stake in everyone else's enterprise, and everybody's incentivized to work, to root for one another. In a world like that, when we do have grounding in what everyone else is doing, when we have our own businesses to protect, it's very likely that we will all take the approach of being builders, makers, doers, rather than breakers, rather than destroyers of value. So, 1937, this gentleman, Ronald Coase, wrote a paper called The Nature of the Firm. In 1991, he won a Nobel Prize in Economics for this work and some other work. He looked at corporations from the lens or through the lens of the cost of transactions, and he wondered why in a world of, in regions of democratic free markets, free enterprise, supposedly open, efficient markets, why do we have this construct called the firm that is based on top-down command and control? So he felt that was incoherent, and through this lens of the cost of transactions, he determined that there were certain inefficiencies of operating in the open market versus within the context of the corporation. These were due to the fact that communication has been slow and expensive, and as a result, decision-making is slow and expensive. Certain transactions are done more efficiently inside the firm. So he identified inefficiencies like search and bargaining and different coordination costs and trade secrecy or transaction privacy and security costs. And in that world that he was looking at, it made sense to have a typing pool and your custodial staff all inside the firm. As we've moved towards more richer, faster, better communication networks, as we develop this technology called blockchain that enables us to come to a decision, even if up to half of the actors on a system are malicious, within 10 minutes in Bitcoin, within 15 seconds on Ethereum, we have a context for essentially outsourcing so many different activities from the firm, moving them into now efficient open free markets, and sort of flipping the lens through which he was looking from trying to figure out how efficient a corporation can get, or how large it can get and still be efficient, by looking at the marginal cost of a transaction and whether it makes sense to do it in the open market or whether it makes sense to do inside the firm. We can flip that around and start looking with this technology and with other technologies that we're benefiting from, how small corporations should get, how small these efforts should get, and we'll probably be moving to a world in which small sets of actors, maybe self-employed individuals, are able to do profound things using these market mechanisms. And there's this guy. So not only is Vitalik not giving away Ether, but he's a destroyer of jobs. So Vitalik spoke to a reporter, and that was captured. So it's destroyer of jobs, creator of better jobs. So we have these technologies: automation, robotics, AI, blockchain. They are transforming our world. Blockchain enables us to move from building siloed infrastructure for companies, for governments, to a world in which the atomic element of IT infrastructure is a collaborative one because it's based on this shared trustworthy infrastructure. So there's an efficiency there, an efficiency of scale and collaboration and fluidity. Robotics, machine learning, etc. Will enable all of us to live our lives without concern for the bare necessities of life, without concern for how we source food and shelter, etc. So we're moving from a world in which People are taking care of transportation by driving many hours and flipping burgers, etc., to a world in which we're going to be well-educated, festival-going gamers. So we're going to be focusing on education, probably very gamified. We're going to be expressing ourselves creatively in so many forms, certainly new forms that have yet to be invented. We're going to be engaging in sports, in physical sports, in virtual sports, augmented reality sports, perhaps. We're going to be pursuing health. It will be interesting if a society is freed from the focus on survival, freed from scarcity mindset, and starts to organize itself in different ways, in terms of pursuit of health, in terms of pursuit of emotional, community, societal health, perhaps. Be going to music and film festivals, events like this one. There are so many events in the music and other spaces around the world that are popping up, and people wear very interesting things at those events. It's getting to be an amusing world where cartoon characters are just walking around as though it's normal. So we'll explore altered states of consciousness. There's a Zen station out there where people are meditating at, and there are other ways of altering your consciousness that people are playing with, and people are turning into interesting medical and commercial practices as well. Finally, we need to figure out how to extend our species beyond this pale blue dot. And there are different groups in our space, in the blockchain space, that are working hard on that, and of some others. So using this technology to enable that sort of enterprise not to be controlled by a single corporation or single governments, where that sort of space arms race is conducted amongst 10 or 20 different actors, and maybe do it in a more collective fashion. I think that's going to be an important project for all of us. So one of the core value principles of blockchain is that it's an infrastructure for trust, because all of the different actors using this system have direct access to the data, tens of thousands of nodes around the world. It makes it very difficult to cheat a system or improperly manipulate a system like that. We've been calling it trust minimized computing or veridical computing, of or pertaining to the truth, and the nature of our database systems influences the nature of how we're able to structure society. And so if we have siloed database systems and we're building siloed businesses on top of those things, that has certain implications for how laws are written, for how we conduct our lives. And now that we have this new shared, collaborative, trustworthy infrastructure, we can get busy building better systems. So the internet, the web, is an amazingly scalable resource. We can add computers to these networks and essentially build well-architected applications that can do many hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. We've taken all of that ability and we've thrown it away. We're now down to, on Ethereum, say 20, 25 transactions per second. What we've done there is we've traded all of that for a new, more trustworthy foundation. So we've got millennia of technology that we've built, but it's all sitting on a foundation that's subjective and that is manipulable and that's run by small cabals in many situations. And so what we can do now is, upon that radically decentralized, more trustworthy foundation, we can start to rebuild scalability. That's going to happen this year in the form of state channels, in the form of plasma. We'll see real applications this year that are quite scalable, and over the next few years, up to 5 years, I think we'll get back to the ability to just put a whole lot of computers on the decentralized web, and those new computers will be able to subserve a whole new swath of transactions. So we're definitely looking forward to scalability. But then we can start rebuilding lots of the infrastructure, essentially taking it from its existing situation and putting it back on top of this new foundation. So the internet is broken. It's been spectacular. In so many ways, it has transformed global society, but it's broken in two significant ways. One with respect to security, one I'll address a little bit later. We've certainly had some security issues in the blockchain space. Usually they happen at the intersection of the legacy financial world and the blockchain world, where we're still using those legacy databases, and essentially those are the things that are vulnerable, and we've seen lots of exploits there. We're also moving into a world in which we have native access to money, programmable money, natively digital money, and so we need to learn how to write software in that much more complicated, difficult environment where there are all these digital assets, and even things like your identity are programmable and potentially manipulable. So the blockchain protocols have been really rock solid throughout the years that they've been running. So the issue isn't really there. The issue is figuring out how to build layers and layers of application layers and harden each layer, and it's about building better programming languages. Daniel's sitting there, and we're going to get there. So no concerns about that. There's a tremendous amount of hard work being done in the form of building pure functional languages that are like executable mathematics that you can prove things about, and other kinds of systems. So applications on blockchain, business processes on blockchain, they're all going to be much more secure. Blockchain is going to be a revolution in IT security, because every transaction against your infrastructure is a strongly authenticated and strongly cryptographically authenticated and granularly authorized transaction. You will need permission through roles and permissions modules in order to access, to do anything you want to do. And certainly you can program interfaces where you just sign one message, and for the next half hour, you don't need to sign any more messages. You don't want to sit down at a virtue poker table and have to sign every time you're placing a bet or getting a card. But the point is that we're no longer going to be subject to security by ring-fenced, firewall-protected soft assets, where, as we've seen, systems are regularly penetrated by hackers or nation-state actors, and at that point, once the hacker's inside, you're in a lot of trouble. In this kind of architecture, it's very hard to own the whole system. You might work very, very hard to get tiny access to a little bit of it. So if you take this new veridical property, trust minimized systems, you add more secure IT infrastructure, and you realize that all of that is built in the context of a radically decentralized, radically open free market peer-to-peer network. You have a force for universal disintermediation. So first, intermediation is an excellent thing in an economy. It adds information, it reduces frictions, it reduces costs, it can add value to transactions, but intermediaries in various industries tend to interpose themselves into a transaction flow, and they use their incumbency, they use their rent-seeking interests and motivations to increase the spread between how much value they add and how much they're extracting from that transaction flow. So this is all about not radical disintermediation, not getting rid of all the banks and other kinds of intermediaries. It's about right-sizing intermediation. And so in this kind of context, disintermediation means enabling content creators or resource providers or service providers to have much more direct access to their consumers. So we built systems that are exploring these approaches. I mentioned before Ujo Music went live on mainnet. They've got quite a large number of artists that are kicking the tires on that system, trying to help us essentially create an adjacent music industry. Civil is another project that you heard about that's creating, one of their taglines is sustainable news infrastructures. So Civil's all about professional journalists getting together to deliver high quality, honest product to their consumers, and it's also about discourse on top of that platform, on top of those stories. Solaris is another really interesting project. They make really good t-shirts, which is why I wear them all the time. Note to all the projects out there, if you want me to wear a t-shirt, make a really good looking t-shirt. It's really it's that simple. So Solaris is really interesting. It's so the Star Wars franchise it sort of broke the hearts of many Star Wars fans a little while ago when they sort of got sold, got commercialized a little more. They changed what they defined as the core canon of that universe, and I know people in this room that were quite depressed when things that they cared about, the things that were real in their lives, were suddenly defined as not real. And so this isn't necessarily going to fix that problem, because there will still be people who argue about which fork of this fictional universe is real. So Solaris is it's a transmedia cyberpunk franchise, so it's going to be stories and art and video and music and games, and it's all crowdsourced and it's all crowd curated. There's some tremendous talented professionals that are working on this right now. And the point is, it's up to them to define what's real and what's not. It's not being created inside a corporation, a siloed organization. It's not up to a few suits to define what's cool in this future-looking universe. So disintermediation, so that was all about content. This is all about services. We built mechanisms to enable something that we're calling dynamic workforce assembly. We're hoping to move consensus towards even more open source approaches, even more globally collaborative approaches, enabling many different actors to get involved with our projects, even if they're not employees of consensus. So dynamic workforce assembly to me means that we have teams that get together, they do a 2-week sprint, they define their user stories, they prioritize them, and the software developers maybe write tests. At that point, we can put bounties to each of these tests. It could could be not software related too. It could be writing documentation, in which case we would use the Cowrie network. It could be artwork, other kinds of prose. If it's an open source project, Gitcoin, which is built on the Bounties network, would be appropriate for that to reward and incentivize open source developers. So we can move many of our projects into a situation where we build the core, we have this great team that's advancing the project, but then we put it out into the world to not only pay more people to build this software, but to enable many people around the world to help us move faster in building out these systems. So this is where we get to what we've been calling the Decentralized World Wide Web, Web 3.0. These kinds of resources, whether it's kilowatt hours or bandwidth or data storage or heavy compute, these are the new kinds of resources that are going to be the foundational elements, the foundational commodities of the coming decentralized World Wide Web, upon which I believe many of our systems will be built. So Web 1 was images, text, hyperlinks. Web 2 added interactivity, e-commerce, mobile, social. Web 2 was, it's where we are right now. Web 2 is orders of magnitude more transformational of global society than Web 1 was, and Web 1 was pretty big. Web 3 is what we're just on the cusp of. Web 3 makes use of those commodities that I was talking about. Web 3 is about trusted transactions, automated agreements, smart software objects on networks like Ethereum. But it's about many other protocols for electricity, protocols for decentralized storage, decentralized bandwidth, protocols for heavy compute. All of this is going to enable us as people, corporations to interoperate much more fluidly. Web 4 is going to be really interesting. Web 4 is something that we're just starting to think about, but we've been hearing about intelligent agents for 3 or 4 decades already. There have been lots of AI researchers who've been putting together these toy systems that would sort of represent me. They'd go out on the web and find good deals for me or answer emails for me, and starting to make some breakthroughs there. But with blockchain, with digital scarcity, with these tokens that represent real value, and with systems like open law, which I'm going to describe in a little while, machines can have real agency. I can empower a software agent to pay to directly move real Ether, real Bitcoin for me, and engage in transactions that way. These intelligent agents are going to enter into agreements for themselves. They're going to enter into agreements with other kinds of entities. They're going to, perhaps they're sensors and they are sending data into data markets and selling their data. Perhaps they're a smart self-driving vehicle, arranging for its own maintenance, arranging for its own fuel, arranging for new self-driving vehicles to be born and turn itself into fleets and have fleets essentially move itself around the world in order to help us humans get around. So the internet of the machine economy is going to be very interesting. It's definitely coming to a blockchain near you. So when is this all going to happen? Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web in 1989. Took about 10 years for it to really ramify for consumers. In the meantime, lots of corporations made use of the technology on their own intranets. they weren't comfortable putting their stuff on the public internet at that point. Wasn't scalable enough, wasn't secure enough, privacy, etc. Blockchain suffers from some of those concerns, and we're seeing corporations now having those same thoughts and concerns around moving to cloud, and many corporations are very heavily on cloud already. So those issues will get worked out, scalability will get worked out, and a mashup, as Amber eloquently described yesterday, of different kinds of blockchain systems, private permission, public permissioned, public permissionless. They will form the internet of blockchains that will be the substrate of what we call the web in the future. So there are thousands and thousands of companies, big and small, that are building out this technology right now. We're going to, it feels like it's coming really fast. It also feels like it's agonizingly slow because we're not seeing the incredibly compelling consumer applications, although on the enterprise side we're seeing some things gain real traction. These little elements are all being built and being matured. There are things like fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens, atomic swap mechanisms with no counterparty risk, name registry systems. There's a big list there that are all essentially representing building blocks that are very interesting in their own right, but when entrepreneurs come around and have a really great idea, these are the kinds of elements that they'll be able to stitch together in interesting ways to build really great solutions. And so we're going to see, the flat part of the curve will, looking back, seem fairly slow, and looking forward, it will seem vertical, but essentially in a year, 2 years, 3 years, I think it's going to feel like blockchain is everywhere. I'm sure to many of you it feels like it's everywhere, but that's not true of society in general. Another really interesting thing about this technology is that something like Ethereum can be thought of as a single world computer. It's a single execution space. So if we put together an adjacent music industry infrastructure and somebody comes along, maybe our iChassis insurance protocol team, they come along and they put out insurance products. As long as those insurance products have easy to use interfaces, somebody on the Ujo music platform can make instant use of those things and maybe insure a tour or something like that. So one new project, because it's so easy to use these things, because they're such great synergies, one new project could make 50 or 100 other projects much more valuable. This is really interesting. So AdChain is a project that has built something called a token curated registry for the ad tech industry. And so token curated registry, many of you may have heard about. It has 3 different kinds of actors. It is essentially a list. It has consumers of that list. It has entities that want to be on that list, and it has token holders that are incentivized to increase the value of their token, and they increase the value of their token by creating a better list, a more usable list. And so people wanting to get on that list, in this case, websites that can host advertising, they stake some money, and their behavior can be looked at and they can be challenged. They can be essentially removed from that list if the token holders don't think they should be on that list. So one really interesting emergent property of this technology is that system's working beautifully, it's live, it's on mainnet, and Facebook decides they want to be on this list. So it's not like they're a fraudulent website or anything like that, but the politics that are going on right now have caused people to make use of this technology, intended for a certain purpose, to express their political will. So very exciting stuff that we're going to see so much of that stuff going forward as these incentivization mechanisms inform mechanism design. So these systems, I use these systems, I love these systems. They suggested the shape of the sharing economy. But really, they're just resource aggregators. They're in the middle. They're these big fat intermediaries that are in the middle of service providers and consumers. They're sucking up 70% or so of the value. We can do better than that. So at Consensus and many other places, we are building what we call protocol-based open platforms. So these are network systems built on top of another protocol-based open platform called Ethereum, in which many different actors in different roles occupy sides of a multi-sided market, and they bring their capabilities to a particular niche. The idea here is that there is no giant intermediary. There are many different actors, none of whom are overly controlling or overly monetizing of the situation. So we think it's going to enable business to take a different tenor instead of adversarial relationships between a corporation and the customer. We're going to have a more collective common good relationship on these networked open platforms. And tokenization is going to enable us to bring different forms of incentivization to the mechanism design that makes these networks work. Interestingly, we're going to talk about identity in a minute. Our access to these networks will be from our blockchain-based identity. Okay, let me back that. So I mentioned this before, but instead of building siloed infrastructure, walled garden infrastructure on legacy-style database systems, blockchain enables us to build shared collaborative infrastructure. About a year and a half ago, maybe longer, we were doing a bunch of work with enterprises and governments. We were talking to people who were doing a bunch of work on Ethereum in different corporations, and they were downloading the software, they were rolling their own enterprise-friendly extensions, and they didn't really want to be in that business. They just wanted to build applications on the platform. So we formed, I imagine Jeremy Miller's out there somewhere. He was one of the main drivers of this project. We formed the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance with a bunch of other organizations. The idea there was to come up with a standard for what enterprise Ethereum would be. So it would be vanilla Ethereum and then a bunch of enterprise extensions. We've recently released version 1 of that specification. And that's awesome. That's really exciting. But to me, the really interesting aspect is that because of the collaborative nature of this technology, many of these 500 plus member companies have gotten together to propose different working groups. So working groups in banking and insurance and advertising technology and healthcare and identity and supply chain, telecom, transportation, et cetera. And so this is biggest blockchain consortium in the world, this is a place where all these different organizations can get together and build specifications and build software so that those sectors or industries can work together more collaboratively. So up until this point in time, we had many organizations that wanted to form consortia. So they're competitors, but they want to collaborate and make things better, less expensive, not compete on certain things that aren't adding value. And so they would get in a room with all their lawyers, and they try to figure out IP issues, and they try to figure out where the software sits, who owns the machines, et cetera. And that takes a lot of work. With this technology, you can start a consortium or a proto-consortium with two counterparties in one use case. You can, through a membership module, you can add and remove organizations. And so you can start your consortia bottom-up, grassroots, and build it right from the start as a very functional grouping and grow it as needed. So the internet is still awesome, but it's still broken. The internet is broken, in my opinion, and this may be the worst concern, although it's closely related to security. It's because it didn't ever have a native identity construct, and it didn't ever have a native money construct too, and so that's interesting as well. But we've built and other projects are doing similar things. We built what we call self-sovereign identity. It is a blockchain-based identity construct that can serve as the root of your identity. It enables you, instead of spraying aspects of your identity across the internet, having those elements monetized by corporations and not adequately secured by corporations, it enables you to upload your data in encrypted form and control all of that information from your side of the browser. If you do want to monetize it, if you do want to selectively disclose it to get better terms on a loan or to a different medical provider, you can do that. You can do that granularly and selectively. This sort of identity system is going to enable us to benefit better from our data. It's also going to enable organizations to have access, proper access, paid for access to our data on data markets. And I think the decentralized World Wide Web is going to be much less exploitative of personal information. Situations like GDPR in Europe, general data protection, that is essentially going to force corporations to think more carefully and better, more securely store personal information. Situations like Cambridge Analytica and the Facebook situation are, I believe, going to push this idea into prominence. So in the developed world, that's going to be a better identity system. But even more importantly, in the developing world, where there are so many people who don't have persistent portable identity or persistent portable reputation, this is going to be a real life changer. So this identity construct can serve as a single sign-on for applications. In the developed world, you can have a linkage to your legacy identity providers like government agencies and banks, et cetera. You can have them lodge attestations on your identity or on your behavior that you're a citizen or that you have an account in good standing. In the developing world, where people don't necessarily have those accesses to financial services or to to identity, they can make use of their social context. They can group of people, if they have access to the internet, they can have their social context attest to their behavior, essentially develop identity and reputation that if they're forced to leave their country, they can reestablish from anywhere in the world. But identity that they can use essentially to make purchases or do things like get microloans and bootstrap their businesses. So we're making significant strides. Our Uport identity team is working with another team, and in Zug in Switzerland, citizens are about to be able to access government services from their self-established blockchain-based root identity. And so I believe the next phase of that project is citizens will be able to vote in plebiscites, so not actual elections, but in Switzerland, it's a very participatory democracy, and so that'll be early exciting experiments in how people can directly participate in governance. Another application that we're working hard on is in the electricity industry. Many have realized that the centralized generation, long-distance transmission of electricity is inefficient, it's vulnerable, it's brittle, and it's already decentralizing. Cheap photovoltaics, cheap storage are enabling people around the world to buy panels and put them on their roofs. This is a mechanism our Grid Plus team is pioneering to enable Alice on one side of the street to get paid for sharing electrons with Bob on the other side of the street. And so this has some pretty profound implications for the robustness of the electricity infrastructure. Currently, many own photovoltaics, but they're not incentivized to own storage because they can't use it they can't get paid directly, so there's no point in time shifting the use of electricity. So this team has built hardware that enables bids to be put out on the network to buy electricity, offers to be put out to time shift the use of electricity, sell that electricity back into the network. And so this is an exciting technology that's going to create a much more robust electricity infrastructure. So OpenLaw. OpenLaw is an incredibly exciting project. It's going to touch on every one of our projects and just how we do business at Consensus. OpenLaw is essentially a protocol. It's a system that enables you to upload legal agreements and turn them into legally enforceable hybrid blockchain-based agreements. We're just getting started using this in our organization. The idea here is that you have an agreement, a human being and soon AIs will be able to take that agreement and parse it for names and numbers, prices, dates, etc. Turn all those things into elements in a markdown language. And I guess we're just calling it legal markup. And in that way, you'll be able to type in names and numbers and populate the entire document with those things. So that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is some of the clauses in those agreements can be programs on the blockchain. So you could actually escrow money into one of these living agreements. You can send data into the agreements. These agreements will be able to make decisions when conditions are met. So we're moving from a world in which we have these static documents that we file away in folders to a world, and soon in our company, where we have software, legally enforceable agreements in these living systems that will enable us to operate. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the talk. So back to Ujo music, because this is it's a good example, because you can do so many things. The music industry serves the music companies, and it serves a small number of artists that are able to make it. Serves the consumers reasonably well, although maybe not as well with respect to diversity of content. So our Ujo team has built an adjacent music industry platform. Artists are now able to upload their identities as individuals and bands. They're able to upload their content. They're able, through open law soon, to attach legally enforceable usage policies to that content. So a consumer can come along, an artist can come along, a filmmaker can come along and get a license for private performance, public performance, derivative works, synchronization rights. The license can be acquired in real time, and the payment is made in real time. So instead, distributed amongst all the collaborators on that work in real time. So instead of an artist not making very much and waiting for 12, 18 months to get their money from different collection agencies, they'll get paid in real time. So the artist can charge less and make more. The consumer can pay less, get access to a greater variety of content, and that's not the end of it. So that's a foundational rights management infrastructure. But the band, because we're in this synergistic single execution space, the band can make use of our GovernX project that you may have heard Nick Dodson describe. The band can create the rules by which it operates itself. The band can decide to table a proposal to issue 1 billion tokens representing ownership of the next album or video or tour, potentially funding projects that way. Essentially, it blurs the boundary between where the band ends and where its community starts. So pretty exciting developments. So these are some artists that have worked with us, a couple of Grammy Award-winning artists. I don't know if RAC is out there, but if you are, hello. So Ethereum has had a number of vectors for success, number of measurements. This is, I think, my favorite one. The Ethereum network, with the help of our Infura team as well, is by far the largest developer community. It's about 40 times larger than the second largest developer community. And it's a system that's really getting well utilized. It's the graph's a little unfortunate, and that's because of the exponential nature of its adoption. The red line there indicates an average number of transactions per day on Ethereum. Ethereum handles twice as many transactions as all the other blockchain systems combined, and it handles them much less expensively. So that's interesting if you're building an infrastructure for the next generation of economic, social, and political systems, and we certainly are going to need to see much more scalability, and we're going to need scalability in terms of the financial constructs around all this stuff. So we are building an adjacent financial industry infrastructure. Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency. There are many other cryptocurrencies. We never positioned Ether as a cryptocurrency. We called it a crypto fuel, one of the first crypto commodities. And we need financial mechanisms to make this all work. We need mechanisms to enable people providing their resources to hedge. We need mechanisms to enable tokenization of securities, utility tokens that wouldn't be considered securities. And despite the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that you've heard over these many months, we're making great strides in helping the people that make those decisions understand that there is great value in utility or consumer tokens. This is going to be very exciting to see these financial mechanisms mature. We're doing some work with a group called True Digital, creating an Ether price index, enabling not only cash settled forwards, but hopefully very soon deliverable forwards for different crypto assets to really rationalize those markets and make it so that people who need to hedge can be certain that the derivative market isn't over here and the spot market's over here and they never touch. We need real mature financial mechanisms. So some implications for the nature of nation states. We live in a world of these foundational elements, things like money, identity, reputation, different kinds of government, education, certificates, reputation, identity. All of these elements have been realized by our company, Consensus, and many other actors in our ecosystem in the form of natively digital foundational elements. Open law, UPort identity. We've got a reputation team that's building reputation systems. We're tokenizing securities, money, cryptocurrency was the first. When you do transactions in the legacy financial world, all those different elements when you're doing a transaction with those different elements, clearing and settlement can extend over hours and days and weeks. When you have natively digital versions of these things, clearing and settlement can happen in a single atomic transaction where the transaction itself is the clearing and settlement. And so in that sort of world, friction and delays go away. And so if you're familiar with the power of compounding interest, you can apply that notion to essentially moving value creation events much more closely together in time because you're squeezing out the delays. And in an economy that can do that sort of thing, I think we're going to see tremendous exponential growth. So what is Consensus? Consensus started about 3.5 years ago. We're currently somewhere north of 800 people in 30 countries. We build product, we do enterprise and government consulting, we do education, we do events, and we do various capital markets activities. We have a venture production studio. We build lots of software projects. Some of them are infrastructure elements, some of them are tools for developers. Many of them are these protocol-based open platforms that are attempting to change the nature of how people deliver services to other people. So the Consensus organism. Some of you may get that joke. So the Consensus organism, we take this decentralization thing fairly seriously in all of our work and in how we organize ourselves. Our teams are highly autonomous. We communicate richly. We work collaboratively. We view what we're doing as building layers of ecosystem, so the Consensus ecosystem, the Ethereum ecosystem, the Ethereum of decentralized, or the ecosystem of decentralizing protocols. We're heavily focused in that full stack and making use of that full stack to build out the decentralized World Wide Web. We have a new tool that is very exciting to me and many of us. We're starting to make real use of this thing. It's called TMNT, Traditional Management Nullification Tool. It is, Consensus. We intend for it to be very flat, non-hierarchical. Little hierarchies pop up where it makes sense. We don't want those things to be rigid and structural. We want fluidity in the organization. This is a tool that's going to enable us to keep checks on that. it takes UPort sign-up. So your self-sovereign identity can enable you to essentially log into this system. You can sign up with Google also. So it enables us to track all of our people, all of our projects, our different relationships and responsibilities. Consensus, as you can see, is circles within circles. Lots of different groups, many people in many different projects. It's all represented right here, and you can drill down on it. You can drill down to the venture production studio, to the different regional offices that do full stack work, from education to consulting to product development. You can drill down to people. So in each one of these circles, we have roles defined. Some of those roles are empty because we haven't hired the people yet for those roles. Some of those roles are filled with people, and you can drill down on those people. You can give people feedback. You can ask people questions, and this maintains a log at different levels. There's John. We're thinking of consensus as an organism. I don't know what to describe Ken Wilber as. Part philosopher, part management consultant, part academic. He studied the nature of how humans get together and coordinate for collective action. He defined a bunch of different common patterns. One, the base pattern was wolf pack, army, machine, family, and organism was what he assigned the color teal to and defined as sort of the ultimate way that we can organize ourselves in healthy and sustainable ways for achieving collective action. So consensus, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a flat, fluid organization. It's a mesh of different projects, from product projects to regional offices to service circles. Each one of those projects is working with the labs team. Let's see if that's next. Is working with the labs team to have APIs defined for it, so little interfaces so that everybody knows what they can expect from those different projects. We're also going to be working using open law agreements to define service level agreements on each one of those APIs. So not only do you know what you can expect from legal or from HR or from the UPort identity team, but you know the terms under which you can expect them to deliver their service, and perhaps we send data into those systems. So if marketing is able to achieve certain amount of response, they get paid a certain amount. Real living mechanisms, fluid mechanisms for operating the company. So at Consensus, we believe that top-down command and control has taken us a long way as a society, but we can do much better. We endeavor to build tools and technologies that will enable the world to build better economic, social, and political systems for itself, and we hope to build some of those systems. We're a new kind of hybrid company. We're part software vendor, part consultant and advisory service. We do fintech, we incubate, we educate, we have a fund. We see ourselves as an organism. We're building better tools for ourselves to mature our different projects, to set up feedback loops, to ensure the health of the system. And we fully intend to externalize everything that we do. So all these tools that we're building, we will turn them into businesses or open source them and enable lots of people to use them. At Consensus, everything's an experiment. Our hypothesis is that we will grow fluid and effective architecture for a world that is decentralizing, for a world that's getting much more fluid, for a world in which the functional units are getting smaller and much more agile. So Consensus Labs is a group that is doing this work of maturing all of our product projects and also helping them wrap APIs and soon service level agreements on those APIs around our product projects, service circles, regional offices, essentially turning even our service circles like HR and finance potentially into businesses in their own right, because we're going to be building or are building technology that is going to be essential for operating in what we're calling the decentralized future. So turning Ronald Coase's lens again upside down. Small groups, individual, self-employed entities are likely to be the fluid, very capable foundational elements of society as we move forward. We believe that tokenizing everything will create fluid, hyper-efficient markets, and we will all be able to sort of wrap ourselves in APIs and be very effective single elements in that sort of economy. So control of our so brings us to what I think is the essence of decentralization. Control of our self-sovereign identities, our assets, direct agency in our economic, social, and political interactions will enable us all to be true stakeholders in this human enterprise and to participate more equitably with one another. These technologies enable us all to have sufficient freedom and resources so that almost none of us is ever in a position in which we have to make what I call bad decisions, decisions that we're forced into making in order to take care of the necessities of life. We're moving as a global society from a scarcity mindset to one of exponentially growing abundance, driven by positive feedback loops, increasingly set free from the constraints of the physical. I would argue that the essence of decentralization is when we're all fully empowered to make our own best decision, and I thank everyone in this room for enabling that with us. Thank you.